Bonjour, bienvenue à Diagonale et en ligne pour cette présentation et conversation avec Maria Hupfield, proposée dans le cadre de l'exposition Manidoowegin, un événement présenté en collaboration avec Seeker. We are very glad that the end of certain sanitary measures allow us to welcome Maria Hupfield and all of you today in our space, and even happier to collaborate with Seeker, a partner of choice. Diagonale is following Maria Hupfield's work for several years now, and when we invited her to present a solo exhibition, it was also beyond her exhibition project and the obvious quality of her work, the possibilities to create a space of discussion around her practice and the issues it raises. Nous pensons Diagonale comme un lieu de diffusion en art contemporain, mais également comme un lieu de conversation et de réflexion. La semaine dernière, nous organisions une conférence autour des contextes de présentation et de récit des objets et artefacts issus des nations autochtones. Aujourd'hui, c'est la voix de Maria Hupfield qui va résonner dans nos espaces. I won't take more time and I'll let Maria Ray from Sika say a few words.
Hello, hi everybody, thank you for coming to our internet audiences, to our future recorded audiences, and those present. It is the first, well, it's an occasion of first, so thank you so much, Maria, for your flexibility and figuring out the logistics of this event. It's the first time that Sika has been on site for a number of years, but in particular this year. It's also the first time that we've been on site, not on Concordia's campus. So for the past couple of years, as so many of us have been doing, we've been gathering via Zoom digitally. So it's really quite a pleasure and I would say a privilege to be here sharing breathing space with you, Maria, but also with your work and with those of you who could join us today on what is the first spring day, I would say, that feels spring as we approach the equinox this weekend. So thank you for coming indoors for a while to share what is also, I think, a warm space. So with that preamble, my name is Maya. I'm the convener of Conversations in Contemporary Art. It's my third year doing so during COVID. And it's my pleasure to welcome Maria to what has been, I guess, a series of what we're saying, the conversation continues. And that's kind of a literal sense. You know, we're continuing to find ways of gathering. And as I mentioned, we normally do so on campus or online. And we do so in the community of Tiohtià:ke Montreal, which is Gaspé land. And I want to also, you know, as we are able to walk and traverse land, to go to events like this one, to think about what we pass, the more than human connections that we pass on the way. It's a very spring-like day, so water is very prescient on the land, and the term Tiohtià:ke refers to, in Gaspé language, the nature of the island of which we're gathering. But it's also a gathering place of Algonquin, so Tiohtià:ke and Montreal is where we're happy to host this conversation with you today. And the idea of conversations continuing, where we find spaces for attention, is a explicit one. And I want to sort of preface an introduction for you, Maria, by remarking on how you've been continuing conversations in like very complicated times, and that some of the ways that I've met you before I can physically meet you were through those continuations of conversations. You're active across so many different spaces. I've been in the Zoom room during your Verlis conversations with your fellowship in the Borderlands Fellowship with the Verlis Center. Also through your work, which you've recently seen at the Greater Toronto, the GTA 2021 Triennial in collaboration with Saliva with the Native Art Department. I've also seen your very generous Instagram feed. You show a lot about process, about your relationships, how you work with students and materials. So you continue conversations all the time. And we're happy to host you to do it in this space with us. And in that sense, I'd love to pass it over to you. But also, you know, as a precursor to let us know like how you're feeling today. What are you looking forward to in terms of this iteration of conversations you've been having all along?
Yeah, good question. So, bonjour, hello. It's really good to be here today. Thank you, everyone, for joining and attending this event. And for those of you in person and online, I'm going to ask if you're here in person, please come closer. I'm going to start in this area, and this feels pretty special, a bit of a treat. Because we have a small audience, I'm just going to ask that we put our hands out, and if your fingers are touching, you're too close. So since we are together, and I'm officially double vaxxed and boosted, I'm going to now reveal my face, and you will be able to see my lips and my mouth. So, hello. Wendena Mojo, Wabasi Quainin Deja Cause, Wabajin Dodam, Wasaxin Tonjaba, Tranco and Dao. It's really good to be here, and Ishnabe Minawajaganash. We drove down today with my husband Jason Lujan, who's also my collaborator with Native Art Department International, and we arrived here at 3:30 and to this beautiful welcome. So it's so gorgeous out here in Montreal. I'm just so much enjoying the sunshine and taking it in. So what I'm going to do is take you through on a very special walkthrough of this exhibition, which I saw for the first time in person today. We've installed it online, and so that's part of these conversations that were mentioned around how we adapt to the times that we're in. And we're going to start here with this banner, which is a solidarity banner. And this is a different iteration. This is a smaller piece that I made. Smaller, it's taking up a lot of the wall space. A smaller piece that I made from another work, which is now at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa, which is quite longer. It was one that I draped around me, around my body. And thinking about this idea of land acknowledgement. How do we acknowledge the land? How do we begin to have this conversation with place? So I'm just going to walk you through some of my thinking. So here we have land. So it's not just about land. It's about land and so on. All the things that connect to it. So this could be so many things that all come from land. So thinking about all that is contained within it. When I started working on the original banner, I was looking at a lot of concrete poetry. So you're seeing a lot of text that's lining up with each other. I was trying to find my words. As a performance artist, someone who uses my body, I often don't speak when I perform, and I've been trying to sort through that. So this next section, originally when I did this, I wanted 4 separate banners, and I made it on one piece. And in the end, I realized, no, they're going to stay together, right? They're not going to be 4 separate banners. So here, so anyway, with this one, it was really important that in thinking about how to be an accomplice to Indigenous people, how do we work together, how do we have strength and difference, that we come together on this idea of solidarity. So I wanted solidarity to be in line with each other. Here we've anchored it in the corner, so it's really a strong point of intersection. So speak solidarity, build solidarity, radical solidarity, await solidarity, action. So that ends with action. Plus, putting things together. And then this big word, which if you know what it is, you know what it is. But if you don't, this word, Gichi Odenana. This is a word I took off the wall of the gallery at the AGO in Toronto. So Wandanenabush had this big territorial acknowledgement, and then instead of Toronto, it had this word. And I was like, what's this word? What's it mean? So Gichi means big or great, and this word means community. So big, community. And then central to community is Ode. So if you know what Ode is, that's your heart. So it's very different to think about community if we're thinking about it, the community being the heart. All right, now we're gonna come over here. I need my helper, my Gaspé wants to come over here. I believe we may have, so this is a piece that has, it's really exciting piece for me. It's on casters. You can move around. Casters meaning that it's a mobile structure, so it can move. So I'm just gonna try and, oh yeah, okay, so we unlock the wheels. So we can see a little bit of their movement. All right, I'm gonna move it around here.
Okay, good.
And what I like about this structure is it's kind of at my height, kind of, maybe. And you're able to see that things like fringe, this is very like old school fringe, it's kind of burlesque, very feminine, allows me to own my own sensualities, to feel really at home in my body. It's just taken a long time for me to come to that place in my life journey. And then here it says, okay, hold on, before I come to that, and on the back are all these beautiful ribbons in many colors. And the thing about the fringe and the ribbon is that it doesn't really make a lot of sense until you see it in motion. When you see it in motion on someone like a dancer, then you understand how it can really extend movement. So I'm interested in that, this idea of an extension of movement. So this piece is a work I made quite a while ago when I was living in Brooklyn, New York. And it says, you need a mirror to read it, to see yourself. It says, Lloyd Oxendine, native New Yorker. And so when you live in New York, you hear this phrase all the time about being a native New Yorker. And so that has a different kind of association if you're an indigenous person, because it's like, well, who gets to be a native New Yorker? But Lloyd Oxendine being this incredible indigenous curator, artist, influencer, brilliant person who I had always felt like if Lloyd couldn't make it, then what chance do I have? So it's a tribute to say that Lloyd Oxendine, as a predecessor, is like for me, one of those original native New Yorkers, and pointing back to that history. So this is just a piece I like to wear when I'm in New York and dressing up. So I'm gonna move this so you can see the back and just kind of place it over here. And this way. So when we put together this exhibition, they asked me about who do I want to have write about the work. And we talked, had some names, a lot of names that came up, a lot of really good people. And then we settled on Sherry Farrell Rissette, who's this Métis scholar from out west, who I've always had a conversation with, but have been dying to write and work with, and invited her. And we had already selected some of the work. And when I read the essay, which is on the website, she talked a lot about felt. And I thought, oh no, there's not a lot of felt in this show. I better include some felt, because usually I work with felt. So I made these clothes hangers, you know, because it's about wearables and wearing things. I'm gonna ask you to hold those for me. And then I also made my, so I'm the artist, so I'm allowed to do this. So I also made this studio apron replica. So it's a replica in felt of the one I wear in my studio. So this is me. It's a bit warm to be wearing felt today, so I'm gonna put it back. Okay. Just really excited to make these little clothes hanger prototypes. All right, now I'm going to go around this way. How are we doing for time? Good. We're good? We have been about 10 minutes or 15? 15. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to stay here on this side, because this is a very closing space. And I'm going to box myself in with the camera. So these are some, I did want to wear these, but I feel like it's, maybe a lot with this outfit. So. But these are some antler whistles that I bought at the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian, and dress them up with a bit of color. And when I collaborate with other people, I'll often have them wear one so that we can find each other through sound in a space like this. So normally what I'd like to do at this point is hand some out and try them, but those days are over. So I'm just gonna come over here to these, maybe I'll get a helper. Yeah, thank you. So I have on display, these are actually two separate works. Often when I'm performing, it happened, I was invited to perform at the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian in New York, and they said, you can come, but you can't leave anything in here. And I thought that was really, I try not to take it personally. So I made the bags like this, so that I could bring everything I needed with me, and then bring it all and take it when I left, right? So I wasn't leaving anything in the museum for them and their archive. Yeah, so let's see. Okay. Nice! So I have a little prize here. This is a catalog of a show I curated in New Jersey on water called The First Water is a Body. There's a poem published in here by Natalie Diaz with a lot of other Indigenous artists from the US and Canada who have all made work around water. So this lovely prize today. If anyone can tell me the name of this exhibition. I know it's on the door, but written backwards. Okay, trick question. Anyone from watching? No. Wait, is that a hand up?
My bad. I wouldn't dare try and say it.
Okay, you know what? So the title of the exhibition is in Anishinaabemowin, which is an oral language. So when we see it written, it's often, written in many different ways. But I'll share. We can see it right here. It's behind the camera. It says Manidoowegin. So Manidow. I'm going to say that a couple of ways, and I want to see if anyone recognizes it. Manitou. Okay, my husband in the back recognizes it. Anyone else? Have you heard of, how about using two words I've said today? Gitchi Manitou. Gitchi Manitou. Has anyone heard Gitchi Manitou? Okay, again, the Chiricahua Apache. You can't win this. We have too many at home. Okay.
Great spirit.
Ooh, okay, great spirit. Yeah. So Gitchi, is big or great, and Manitou means spirit. So the title of the show, I know the write-up is in the corner, so you weren't able to have the cheat sheet. But it basically means a spirit cloth. So that was the term that Sherry had in the essay, and we were like, that's the name of the show. We're going to have spirit cloth. Okay, so this is for you.
Be good.
All right. Yay. We'll put these back. That felt appropriate because this design on the bag, this abstraction zigzag, is an abstraction of, you probably recognize it, water, right? So it's, all right, we're gonna come over here. You can sneak a little closer if you want. So we have this beautiful lightning bolt that I often wear, and then this. I thought it'd be kind of nice to, since my hair is down, to let you see it on and hear it. But, oh no, it's gonna be very hot. it sounds great. It sounds so good. These are Unity pins that I remember they used to give them out at every event in Toronto, just like a medicine wheel to show balance, and the 4 directions, very Anishinaabe. Obviously this is not my spring or summer hat, but just wanting to embody balance with this. Looking good. Okay. This is the most Instagrammed work from the show. I was not sure about tagging it. This shirt was after the Trump election in the US. I was living in the US at the time, and I said, this was not the president who I moved here for. I had moved there when Obama was there. I said, I want to go and see what that's about. So there's a street in Manhattan called Canal Street where they're often selling shirts. And it often reflects what's going on at the time. So once that election happened, we saw a lot of shirts like this. And when I saw it, I immediately thought of James Luna and the work that he did where he wore a similar style shirt. And I thought, okay, I bought 2. I didn't know what I was going to do with them. And then when I moved back to Canada, I had this idea that I was going to add more of this ribbon to it. So this is called Untitled bracket. It's Untitled after Luna or Untitled Luna. So as a sort of tribute piece to the late James Luna, who was an incredible artist and a mentor in a lot of ways because of his generosity and also his strength and his fight to continue as one of the first Indigenous performance artists. So it felt good to have this. This work here is from a project I did with a collaborator, Charlene Vickers, someone who I met when I was living on the west coast of Vancouver, who's also Anishinaabe, one of the first other Indigenous artists who I started to collaborate with. That felt really amazing. So we kind of had this Laurel and Hardy routine because we're very different, but also had all these connections. So what you're looking at are the penny that each of our respective pennies from Best in Vagabond, and our headphones with our extra hair for extra strength, braided real strong. And then these are just some little shakers or shishikwans, so we could, keep rhythm. Share that. And then when we were performing, we also often had our own Walkman. There's only one here because Charlene has hers, but I have her Anishinaabe Moen tape in here. So does this work? So a lot of the questions I've been asking about how do you take work like this that's living and alive and part of that performance is into a gallery space. How do I display it in a way that it doesn't become fixed or dead or lifeless? So I had to come up with a lot of different strategies, and this is one way of showing something that's between, it's not on the wall like a painting, it's not in the space like a sculpture, but it's sort of between, so it's leaning. And then this idea of using unfinished, everyday material that also is from construction, so it's in process. And it's also, what I love about this is that it's made for the body. It's this size, because this is, I'm not going to do it, but the biggest size you can make that you can carry, right? So that's what I like about using these materials, that they are meant that you can handle them. Okay, and then lastly, I'm going to come over here to this piece, which is triangles. I created these triangles of the sequins when I was working with a musician who is a really good friend based out of New York and does a lot of keyboard and singing, Electric Gin. I actually brought her to Montreal when my show was here, the one who keeps on giving, and she performed live in the gallery while I went around and activated things. So we really had to have a synchronized connection. So we rehearsed a lot together. And we made this for a performance we did at the Brooklyn Museum that had this huge 50-foot banner that fell down that was red, and it said, "The kind of dream you've never seen." Thank you. The kind of dream you've never seen. So that was the name of the piece. So we would wear these. And then again here, just so you can see, moving around. So we are much closer in height than this would indicate, but just to show these beautiful triangles. How are we for time?
30 minutes. So,
Right on time?
yeah.
Okay. All right. So then we'll. So we had about 30 minutes where I was going to take you through the gallery, and now we're going to resume the second portion of this event, where we're going to sit up here and have a little Q&A.
So, well, I wonder if we can, thank you so much for your remarks so far and enlightening the space for us. And I wonder if we could start off with a question related to that agency of the objects as memory keepers, but also having particular experiences with you. And when pieces are in storage or acquired with recent acquisitions, for example, at AGO, are there notes that you have in that form that sort of talks about how they'll be hosted in storage spaces or in collections when things are shipped?
Yes. yes. Well, it depends on the work, on the piece. So some work, when I'm finished with it, it's done, and it does become more of a sculpture.
Mm-hmm.
Although now more and more I'm realizing that point of knowing when it's done may change even for me. So for example, I had this gorgeous, heard this story about a spiral. So you can see a spiral, it's just a geometric form, right? It's just a spiral. But then when I spoke to Alan Corbier, it really came alive. He said, well, you know, Maria, the spiral is that moment before underwater panther is about to surface and appear from the water, and that's how you know, because you see the spiral. And when I heard that, I'm like, I want to be underwater panther. I want to be, so I made the circle, put jingles in the spiral, and cut a head flap in the middle, and then so I could pop my head out in the middle like underwater panther. But then when I made it, I took some photos, and I quickly realized that I didn't want to perform in it. I couldn't, it just, I felt like it was maybe a poncho. So I sent it to my dealer, I went to sell it, I can let it go. And then we put in that contract of sale that I could still access it in the future for performance. And of course the museum is like, oh yes, Maria can come and wear it for us in the museum and do a performance. And we really put that to task for an exhibition, for the exhibition, the one who keeps on giving at the power plant that traveled, because to their credit, they packed it up, put it in a truck, drove it to my community. I wore it in a video, I had it in a video. My sister Deanne wore it, created it back up, drove it to Toronto, did another performance, recorded that, and then it continued to travel with the exhibition, but it also became used in this other video work. So that's the example of when we started to look at that and think about that language around it. So now whether that's something that continues through me, or if that's another thing where I say, well, how do I expand that out? It's something I'm negotiating and thinking
And I appreciate your willingness to answer what maybe feels like a logistical question. But I also think that, you know, it gives us insight into your ongoing relationship for pieces and the care of them when they are in collections, when you may not be there, but you're connected to them in that sense. But then, would you say that then, like, for example, with the anecdote you just shared, that there's a certain amount of the objects helping you figure out a performance and changing it along the way based on those logistics, or how you're feeling at the time and the site?
I think I understand what you're saying. Yes. So for sure, I will return to works, and or maybe a better way of putting it is that when I make something, it's a very intuitive process. I'm like, this belongs with this. I want to see these together. And then it'll be very clear to me. I'm like, oh, I want this to be an apron, or I want this. But I don't always understand. And this is, you know, something that I realized because I was living in the U.S. Because they have a very different system. They're not, you know, there's not a lot of grants for artists. So you're not always creating work knowing ahead of time what the end result is going to be. So in the US, I wouldn't be like, oh, I know I have to make this for this end project. Like, I have to have it fully realized before I can do it. So in that way, it opened me up to just make whatever. So I would make these things, all kinds of things. That's, you know, I made the jingle boots, which felt really ridiculous to think of, like, putting these jingles on these boots in my mind. But I just wanted to have sound. And then afterwards, I think of a performance. And it's through, you know, I talk about thinking with your hands, or it's in the making, that I then began to think of these other, what I'm calling now is a kind of like story work around it. And that those narratives may shift and change. But each performance I do is very specific to the occasion and to the site, right? Like, I think to walk through an exhibition, even of the same work, if it's in a different gallery, a different layout, with a different group of people, it would be a different experience as well, right? I adjust it, and I think that's the life and the living part of it, the performative part of it, the performance part.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to extend the floor to others who might have questions or curiosities for Maria, and I'll have a check on the Instagram Live as well to see if there's
okay. Take a moment while she checks. I know we walked through. I don't know if there's anything but questions. Yes.
Well,
Yeah, Max, was it?
Like watching your work today, I really asked myself, like, how do you keep a sense of joy with creating? Because I mean, when I look at, for example, these speak solidarity, build radical, I hear a lot of activism behind that. So how, as an artist, do you keep not only keep but cultivate that inner joy, that inner peace, in order to keep on doing things?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I feel like there's so much trauma around in the day-to-day living that when it comes to my art practice, that is a place where I want to have pleasure. I'm choosing to make this work, and so it actually gives me a lot of joy to create it. What I've learned, especially during COVID, is I find it very self-regulating to sew. That's why a lot of, you can tell my work because it's hand-stitched, like it's, or machine, through my machine, or you know, you see the drips, you see all those things that show a person made it. And things are made well, but not so much so that you're like, oh, this was cut out of a machine and there's 100 of them or something, or thousands of them. So yeah, I think having that joy, and then the other part I think we hear a lot more about is that it can also be a radical act to have joy, to express joy, to show that you can have joy in your life. It's not to say that everything is easy or wonderful, but I think art is definitely a space where I make that a priority. And in fact, when I collaborate with my husband, Jason Lujan, with Native Art Department International, we have rules. And one of those rules is that we have to enjoy it. And if we're working and we start to fight, then we'll step away and he'll say, Maria, this isn't fun anymore. I don't want to work with you. And I'll be devastated and we'll go for lunch. Well, okay, let's go for lunch. And then we'll come back and we'll find another entry. So I think that's important to have that, because the other part is early in my career, I didn't want to feel like a victim, and I didn't want to play the role of a victim, and I didn't want to put my pain out there for people to consume. They don't get that from me, right? They're not going to get it. I think that is, you're right, it can be in the work as well. But I don't want to re-traumatize myself or my kinfolk and family through it. And I do feel like I'm formally trained as an artist, so this is where I belong. I should be in this gallery. The gallery makes space for me, and we work together, right? And if they're not, then it's like, well, then I don't want to work there, right? Like, I feel at this point I have that choice. So, yeah.
I appreciate that question in terms of like the labor and maintenance behind things. And we talked a little bit about this event around the logistics of art labor and how there's so much unseen behind what we get to enjoy in a gallery space, even when it is also mobilized in performance and we get a sense of your embodied relationship to these objects. But you are, I mean, in addition to being an artist and finding that emotional space to capacity of being an artist, you also curate and you also teach. And there's a mentoring role that comes with that. And I wonder if that's a conversation you have with your students at the moment in terms of not only capacity, but I suppose, you know, even just like making work that is sometimes just for you because you need to make it. Sometimes work is also for a gallery space and an audience. Is that something you also compartmentalize and talk about with your students?
Yeah, that for sure comes up when I'm working with students in the MVS program, so the Master of Visual Studies program at the University of Toronto, in the faculty, in Daniel's Faculty of Architecture. Anyway, yeah, so when I work with grad students, and I'm, you know, if I'm a principal advisor or I'm having studio visits, then for sure that's what I feel like I bring, because I have, you know, over 20 years of experience exhibiting as an artist. I'm bringing that experience as a professional artist into this institutional space. And I believe that artists function in many ways. And Jason and I talk about this a lot, about that there's room for everyone. There isn't one way to be an artist. And so that's something I do. I have very different, actually there's a program I took when I was in New York called the Artists in the Marketplace. And they would say, well, if you want to be an artist, you have to think of your financial income as being a table with many legs. So if one comes out, it doesn't fall over, right? So it was really having many different things. But I think to take that a bit further, the tabletop is your practice. So everything comes back to it, right? You don't, so if I'm writing, it's coming from my research. If I'm curating, that's coming from my research. When I'm talking, that's as well. So it all points back. And I think that a big part of when I moved to New York back in the day, that was with the intent purpose of showing, like really wanting to have a cohesive body of work, so that when people invited me, they wanted Maria Hupfield. They knew I would bring felt, might be some performative action, and that I wouldn't be interchangeable with another woman or another Native artist, but that they wanted me. And they understood all the they're interested and invested in all the specificities of my work, and that brought value. And so the other specifics around my culture adds more layers and makes it even richer, right? So if you know Ode means heart, that adds even more value, right? but that it has many layers, so of entry for all folks. Yeah. But what I do try to do early in my career was avoid aesthetic signifiers that would be so culturally coded that people would shut down, that they were only interested in it for a cultural experience, that they wanted to consume it for that, and they weren't going deeper. And I think that I'm at a point now where some of that's changing a little bit for me. Like, I will introduce myself with my nation now, but there was a time where I wouldn't, because I didn't want to perform that. But now I feel like I can bring all of who I am into a space.
You had your hand up. Or back to Jason.
Okay. I wanted to ask you to elaborate a bit on the two V words.
Oh, the vestige vagabond?
Yes.
Yes, I feel like you're interviewing me again. We just had an interview recently together.
And you can see it on our Facebook.
Yeah. So the two sport pennies, one says vestige and the other says vagabond. So that work really came out of a performance I did with Charlene that was specifically in Santa Fe. And it was, so that was our own language. I mean, I think there's a lot around words that start with V, like just all kinds of things. Just really wanting to show that we're mobile, that we move, that we, not in a nomadic way, but maybe a migratory way of moving in cycles, in vestige, like things on the surface might not always be what they are. For that work, I also feel like I want Charlene here with me to talk about it, but really that, we liked it. We liked saying vestige vagabond. We like this idea that we're these vagabonds and we have this vestige. But we just like the way it sounded. So we went with that, yeah.
And there is a graphic reference to your work there with the V.
Oh yes, the triangles. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Hannah, yeah, please.
I'm gonna go look at Sherry's essay. I didn't know she wrote for this, and that's great. I'm going to go check it out. I was curious about the apron. Why did you decide to make your apron hangers?
Oh, why did I?
Yeah, like as a new object for felt. I'm just curious.
That's a really new work. So both of those, and Jason was telling me they're two different colors of gray. I'm like, yes, they're two different grays. I use all kinds, and those, I would say, are function as a sort of, if there was a commission, or they're very specific to this show. So I knew when I had the invitation that I wanted to focus on items of my work that I wear, and I wanted to see them together and think about them in conversation. And then at Christmas, when we had that second lockdown, it became very real. We're really going moment to moment. Like, is the show going to happen? Can we have it? Can I come? I had to basically cancel everything in January. I thought I was driving here. So this is really new work that is made specifically for the show, and because it's about wearables, I wanted to have this very domestic reference to clothes hangers and my apron in the space, like as in my artist apron. And it's been so nice to have the occasion to display the work together, because then I can think about how things are talking to each other and how to display. So that work, and then the two bags, and even with the Unity hood, we had to, through FaceTime, we had to think about combining, like, are we going to show the bags together? Where are we going to put the apron? And there was a moment where we're like, we're not the show, and I said, the apron has to be in the show. So, so we had to figure it out. So I think those are the kinds of very real logistics that you have when you're in the space. I mean, now that I'm here, I'm like, of course, it always belonged. This is how it was meant to be, right?
Well, I love that you included hangers. Yet those are the only hangers, and it's all of the different sort of suspended, arranged elements. But then when you're interacting with the forms, I wonder if you've ever done or would consider doing a performance, or that if you do performances with the wooded forms, because it's kind of like, made me think of like David Copperfield magic or something, like spinning this around, look at the backside, look at the backside, but they're really fun when they're activated.
Yeah,
right?
Thank you so much. It makes me so happy to move these structures around. I had a show at the Herd, and it was all about performance. How do you display performance? So in the vitrines, I was like, we're going to use vitrines as a museum. This work has to be safe, but we're going to drill in breathing holes into it, so we can imagine that it can breathe, or it can hear us, or we can talk to it, right? And this was the other strategy. Was I came up with this design, and we had them fabricated, and that whole exhibition was meant to be that I was going there 3 times, there'd be 3 performances, and then we couldn't do that. So I haven't had the occasion to really move them around, and that's why every chance I get, I'm like moving them around. I just love the clear casters, like these details. I'm just like, yes, this is a beautiful, and they're so well fabricated and beautiful. And yeah, they're sculptures in themselves, right?
Definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe it wouldn't be me activating everything, maybe I would have some helpers. I don't know. Maybe I'll have the chance to do that coming up. But really, this is one of the first times. This and the Toronto Art Fair, where I was able to move them around a little.
There's an interesting, where you were just talking about the interaction and the moving around of these sculptural components, and it made me think of the dual gazebo piece that you had in the Greater Toronto Art Fair in 2021, and the work with the Native Arts Department International, and how that worked with the aesthetics of, well, for those who didn't see it, it was the large, dark painted gazebo-like structure, and they were obviously very stressful to explain or discuss and work in front of the artists.
Or both.
Would you like to describe it? But the point I'm getting at is the work itself was not accessible in terms of like physically approaching it and going within the gazebo structure, the dual structure of the gazebos. It was cordoned off, and the show was really, I think, mostly seen by folks between particular waves of COVID, when there were so many like signs of like do not enter or specific ways of viewing and engaging work. Is that something that you're continuing to think through as well as we experience works differently with that memory of COVID and accessibility?
Yeah, so that was a very specific work that Jason and I, when they sent the invitation, they asked us about, is there a project you're already working on that has been affected by COVID? So, and there was. We had another double gazebo that was outdoors that people could access, that was in Markham. And so we then thought, well, why don't we do another iteration for MoCA, but this one you can't access it. In fact, it was painted flat, this special flat black paint. What was he's passing. It was like, I want to try, but I'm not going to. The special black paint, I think Anish Kapoor. Anyways, flaming before. So where if you touch it or step on it, it ruins it. So to actually engage with it would be to destroy the work. And similarly, that it's these 2 gazebos that are created so they intersect. So to remove one would destroy the other and would destroy the unit, right? So it had all these layers. And that actually had an AR component where you could scan a QR code and see it and project it in whatever space you're in. So you could have another kind of encounter with it, even though you couldn't physically engage with it. So yes, that was absolutely a work that was about the COVID moment and that we were looking at. For the work, like the work that you're seeing in here, so much of my own practice is about being in person, and that hasn't been afforded to me. So a lot of the exhibitions I've been focusing on have been how do I have really been going back to existing work and thinking about them and thinking through them and reassessing them and wanting to consider how to represent them in an exhibition, thus as wearables. The other show I did, which was here in Montreal, was called Story Work. So I was thinking about this idea of my performance as story work. So bringing it together around that, doing a lot of reading, all this stuff was happening, bubbling around it. So when you make work, you have to make it, and then you have to think, how do I show it? How does it display? Because that changes a lot of its meaning. And so there's things that have happened. For example, the Lloyd Oxendine piece over there used to be like two straight up arms. And when which seemed like a great idea, but then for this show, I'm like, no, one arm has to go like this. It's more dynamic, right? So these are the things that can happen when you're able to be in a space and be with your work. And some of that happens in the studio, but for me, some of my work was in Montreal, some of it was in Toronto, and so really having, thinking of the gallery as a sort of laboratory or a place of investigation where you can piece that together, or as a stage. That's another thing I have to think about it, as a stage where I'm performing in. And that also came actually out of an exhibition that also happened here in Montreal a little while back with Barbara Clausen and Pip Day at SBC Gallery. They had an exhibition called Stage Set Stage, where you had something in the gallery and then you did an activation or performative element that happened as well in the space. And they literally created a stage in the gallery by Sharon Haynes and Andrea Geyers. And it was just so exciting as an artist. And for that, I didn't put any art in it. Well, I did, but my art ended up being photographs of labels from my work. And then I used that as a score and went around and tried to connect with those objects without the objects. So yeah, very like heavy. By the way, altered them. I was really excited. So that was a space where I was thinking a lot about what is the role of the gallery and what are the rules of the space. It's very different to be in an artist-run space versus an institutional space. Different rules, different protocols around that.
And do you find when you're doing performances, there's also different energies or curiosities with the audience who's in the spaces?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's part of the fun of it. Like, so I'll create a score, and that gives me my structure, so I feel like I have what I need on my terms. I know what I'm gonna do, and then the variable is the audience. Like, I don't know. I remember being in Brooklyn, and I was in the back room, and they brought me out to do a performance, and when I came out, everyone was standing, leaning against the wall. Like, it was a performance space, so there wasn't art on the walls. But they were all leaning against the walls, and I thought, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? Like, they're all terrified,
like
giving me space.
Yes,
Yeah, giving me space. So my first action ended up being entering and moving between them and the wall and displacing them all around, right? So these are the things that you can't anticipate what's going to happen. Or if you come out, I also had, for some reason, I think it was 7A11D in Toronto, I came out and I had said, I said, this is called Fixed Time, it's going to be the the story. So when I came out, everyone was seated in the gallery, and I'm like, oh wow, what am I, like, how am I gonna get around when everyone's seated and fixed in space? So yeah, absolutely. It's very different to perform at Gifting Dance, where there's a dance area and then the stage, and then the audience is on bleachers. And you tell them they can come into that dance space. They work very differently as an audience.
Yeah, and then also being, I guess, breaking down that proximity of, oh well, I'm here on stage with you or near you. Am I now also part of this performance? What's my role here and responsibility?
So for sure. So there's a lot of like, so first of all, people are really uncomfortable in performances. It's a very uncomfortable thing. I realize no one wants to be singled out or put in a situation where they might look dumb or like they don't know what they're doing, or be a prop to someone else. So I try and be generous with my audiences and have a bit of care. I try to instruct them and guide them. So I think it's important, for example, to do things like say, we're going to watch a video, it's going to be 2 minutes long, so these are the sorts of things that are like, how do you, because people forget when you're in a gallery, they forget the rules, even of the gallery. I've had performances in a museum where, like I said, the McCord, where I came out and because I was performing, suddenly people were trying to sit on display cases, right? Like they're like, because they want to, so I really have to, ahead of time, think about the size of the audience, what am I doing, and then, and I think that my performance is influenced by a lot of things, but one part that I was very, as a young person, very athletic and did a lot of sports, and so being part of a team, and how do you signal, how do you talk to each other. And then the other part is when I first moved to New York, I was a cultural ambassador at the Smithsonian Museum of the American Indian, where I would take people around on walks. And so suddenly I would have to have a different role of authority. And so I think that also, when I'm performing, I'm not thinking of that museum or that job, but I'm definitely thinking about my role as and my responsibility in that role of that people are trusting me. I actually find it really hard to watch performances on Zoom, because when you're in person, if someone's hurting themselves or doing something that looks harmful, there's still people around. But if they're on Zoom and something happens, you feel helpless, right? Yeah. Not that I've seen those, but I always I don't want to, and that's maybe what I mean when I say I don't want to re-traumatize myself, right? So. That there's many ways to have a shared experience with an audience. That's what I'm interested in, that idea absolutely. Of, even though we all experience the same event, because we're different people and different experiences, we will leave perhaps with a slight variation of what happened. So how do you document performance when that's the case, right?
Well, absolutely.
Through a singular experience. But I'm interested in those multiple stories, and I feel like multiple stories could provide a more insightful view of that event.
It sounds like improvisation is a really big component of that dynamic, or being, I don't know, can one really be prepared to improvise? I think it's more of like taking a position of being open and willing to improvise in terms of working with an audience in that capacity. And with the objects in that capacity, because they can break, or there can be background sounds, or there's all sorts of logistics that you can't control. And if you improvise, you're able to bring that into like a hospitality of the moment.
Yeah, it takes a certain amount of confidence, but and generosity, but also trust, for sure. But I think there's a lot of different things at play. But that's also very specific to my practice as a performance artist, and that's not just, people come to performance for many different reasons in different places. So that's some people may not be interested in that. I know for myself, I find it very empowering to have a performance. In fact, I have to be careful if I make it look too easy, because the audience gets upset because they're like, oh, well, did she even try? Like, did she even care? Like, you know, did she work at this? And I'm like, I put a lot of thought into what I'm going to do. So, I think with performance, that history of seeing, you know, people want to cry or feel something or be human or, you know, be in danger or are not the same reasons that draw me to performance. Like I like to feel more empowered, and when I set up those situations, that the score, that gives me the confidence. Like that gives me the confidence. I have what I need, and I put things where I want them, and then the rest is knowing I'm gonna get through it. I can do it. I can handle this. I can do this. And maybe that's also that in some ways I can be very anxious, like anxious traveler, and very nervous, right? Like, and I really crave a lot of sort of stability, things that ground me. And so in the performance space, I know it's all going to be okay. It's going to be good.
Yeah. Please.
I have a question. You talk about performing to audiences and revisiting and reactivating some of your sculptural components, all of the different places with the audience. But at the same time, you are not the same person either. Can you walk us through maybe what your thoughts, what you're thinking of in those moments when you revisit these artworks for the second or third times and reactivate them?
Yeah, that's thank you, dear. Yeah, I mean, very simply, probably just, it's a life. Like, it's me, it's a life for me. Like, I'm encountering these and living through things. There's also, I would say, with my own work, a lot of a layer of autobiography that happens as well. That's private, right? So there's my own reasons why I'm doing this for myself. That may be very personal, and no one else may care or be interested or want to know or be invested in those things. Not saying that they're not important, but I think that also comes out of, as a young artist and a woman artist, that there's early on in my career just wanting to focus on having people talk about the materials and how I'm using them and my approach, right? And not get caught up in all the autobiography. I mean, maybe that could be a show at some point. Maybe like in the wearable show. Now this is the life show. But definitely living with this work, and it appears in different ways. Makes appearances. And that would be another question about in thinking about the value of a work, perhaps, or looking at often with certain things like what is the, I talk about this with collections, there's a term for it, like the provenance of something. What's the performance provenance of it?
Yeah.
You know, oh, Maria wore the Lloyd Oxendine for performance at ABC No Rio in Brooklyn, and all she did was shake everyone's hands, right? The performance adds with the object, they go together, right?
Yeah.
The record of it, the story of it with the object. And that would also connect also with the way that, okay, this is the better answer, the way that museums, when you see an object in a museum, it's stripped of context. It's removed from, maybe there's an artist, maybe sometimes it's artist unknown. They can't even be bothered to say who made it, or find out who made it, or didn't at the time care enough to do that. So I think it is important to know who that is connected to. and everything about it as well. So,
Yeah, not to care for it.
yeah, all of that's important,
Yeah.
like a recontextualizing.
Yeah, that's the question and how you want to, I guess, also talk about performances makes me think of the comment you made earlier about the documentation of live moments. Is that something that you plan ahead of time also, performance, and it's like when you were laying out this show and how it's being documented as an archive? I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you negotiate that, especially for the students who I know will be listening. We talk a lot about like documenting and how you grow an archive of a practice, but when it's performance as well, I'd be interested to hear how you plan for that.
Sure. So I think a lot about archive for those very reasons, that with performances often it comes back to just a photo. You see a photo of Chris Burton that he was shot, and all you have is a photo and someone's story, but unless you were there, how could you have experienced it? So that for sure is part of, as an artist, part of what's in my realm. So so right now I'm working on a digital archive that includes some artwork, and what we've come to realize is that archives are very big, and so it's standardized. It's very for those of you who have looked through archives, it's very, in my opinion, boring, overly, a lot of information. It doesn't always express the dynamic nature of the work. So what we've come to realize is that for each item, we are going to customize that page for that artist. So what that means is rather than having hundreds, we're just probably going to have like maybe a little over 10. And so each one becomes a sort of, gets remapped in relation to many factors. So suddenly where, we might need a map to it, there may be a song related to it, there may be a video recording, we want to show a body in it. Like in my own documentation, I often try and at the very least move towards including at least my hand, right? Because it's, so those are things I do definitely think about.
Yeah, I like that shift of the archive, like, it has to be this expansive, encompassing thing, but rather than that responsibility, thinking about the depth and what the information, how that will allow other stories to be told.
For sure, and that really came out of my own dilemma around how do I have a website for my work? Like, how do I show all these things around my work? And so, I'm getting closer. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
You do have a very good website, I will say.
I made that website because I'm like, I gotta make sure people know I'm busy. I gotta keep showing I'm busy. Have a web presence. I'm not really on social media. I actually joined Instagram because I had applied for a job at the University of Toronto, and it was for performance and media, and I thought I should have some kind of media presence. So I'm not on Twitter. I think if I was, I would lose my husband. Stand for it. I have a very addictive personality, and I would start to.
But see here, from my perspective as a follower on Instagram, but amongst your tributaries, it seems like you have a very good approach to it in terms of
It's
I'm taking breaks.
Yeah. Mental wellness breaks.
Yes. But also showing the moments of you in spaces of creation and making decisions around materials. And I remember, I don't know in what form it was, but I heard you remark that nobody's ever asked me why I use felt. And I think in this show, especially with the piece of writing with Manidoowegin, it's very explicitly discussed.
Yeah.
And I see, in those moments on Instagram that you do decide to share, you're working with the felt and you're cutting it and it's thick and it absorbs you and your gestures, and I see how that comes across in a different way. So it's a generosity on things you post like that. But I wonder, and maybe this could be like a meta winding down question, because I have no sense of what time it is.
5 minutes.
Okay. Are there questions that you're surprised you're not asked in relation to your material practice or installation choices? Why you use certain materials or not? I always feel like what we're not asked is sometimes an interesting question to just address.
I don't know if it's what I'm not asked. Maybe there's things I'd like to be asked sometimes. This is a kind of tricky question right now because I feel like we're in, like during the pandemic, that it's a different, the way things were before is a different moment here. The other thing that happened recently is I relocated 6 months before the pandemic to Toronto, so I went back home, and then 6 months after, so we moved back home, started this whole, get it situated, and then things quickly shut down, right? And so, I feel like for me, it's very different as an artist, a very different experience than someone who perhaps has been in the same place for a long time, and then they're like, oh, now I can just be in the studio all the time, right? And I have been very supported and have been focusing a lot more on things like talks that I've been organizing through the Viewer List Center, fellowship for the Breaking Protocol Fellowship. So those are, I'm asking all the questions that I want to be, right? So it's a very different moment for me in my career. And the other tough thing is when you're doing stuff that people might not be expecting or that is new or perhaps adventurous, that not everyone is clued in on how to proceed. So now I feel like I've done things a couple of times where now those questions are happening. Like, I think in person I would often get asked about why I felt, Joseph Beuys, blah, 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 blah. But I wouldn't get reviewed in that way or written about, work wouldn't get written about. And they were usually confused about, this Native woman, we don't know what she's doing, right? She's not doing the things we're expecting or we want her to do or perform for us. So it's taken a bit of a moment for that to happen. And the other thing I've been doing a lot more of during the pandemic is, of course, reading a lot and really looking back into my own, reassessing my whole practice and inventory and bodies of work. The other thing has been, because I'm teaching, I also do a lot of guest critiques with different master's graduate student programs. So right there, you get asked a lot of really exciting questions. You have a lot of conversations with people who are so excited to be making work, who are at the cusp of their career, trying things out, who are eager to do things. So that percolates a lot, and there's a lot of good questions.
Are there any final questions from the audience? I don't want to be the one to ask the last question if there are others percolating tomorrow.
I think we're good.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Who was the Charlene in Santa Fe?
Who is Charlene?
No, what's her last name?
Oh, Charlene Vickers. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew it was Charlene Peppers.
Oh.